"He hasn't got the mind for it," the tall one said, loud enough for the whole forecourt to hear, and he said it 3 feet from a man who could read a board the way other people read a clock. I was standing at the post beside that man. His name was Sergeant Calder, though the tall one didn't know it, didn't care to know it, and never once looked at his face. And I watched my friend not move a single muscle while a champion of the world told a laughing crowd that the soldier in front of him was furniture with a pulse. "I am a guardsman. My name is Wills. I have stood the ceremonial line at the stone court of our house for 9 years, and I have learned that the hardest thing a man ever does in this uniform is nothing at all. You think the rifle is the weight. It isn't. The weight is the wanting to turn your head to answer, to be a person for 1/2 of 1 second. Calder taught me how to carry that. So when the tall man leaned in and called him empty, I knew exactly what my friend was doing behind that flat, forward stare, because he had taught me to do it too. It was the day of the Grand Invitational. Once a year our house throws open the long gallery and the inner forecourt to the masters of the old game, the board game of kings, the one with the towers and the foot soldiers and the slow, terrible patience of it. Players come from across the world. The reigning champion comes, the challengers come, and a sea of cameras and admirers come with them, because the man who can see further than any other man alive is a kind of celebrity now, signed posters and all. They were everywhere that morning, the players in their fine coats, and the loudest of them was a young man the crowd called Devin Castlane, who had won 3 world titles and had never, by his own account, met anyone worth the trouble of beating. He had arrived 20 minutes early and bored, and a bored champion looks for a board. There wasn't one in the forecourt, so he found the next best thing, 2 motionless men in red who couldn't talk back. "Look at him," Castlane said to his entourage, gesturing at Calder with the back of his hand. "Trained to stand. That's the whole skill. You could paint a target on his chest and he'd thank you for the attention." A laugh went around. Someone filmed it. "Some men think," he went on, warming to it, "and some men are pointed at a wall and told stay. I'd put money on it, this one couldn't see 2 moves ahead if you spotted him the first one." I felt my own jaw tighten. Calder's didn't. His eyes stayed level on the middle distance, his white gloves stayed crossed on the rifle, his breath came as slow and even as a tide. To anyone watching, he was exactly what Castlane said he was: a statue, a stander, a man with no mind for the game. I knew better. I had played Calder 11 times across 9 winters. I had never come within sight of beating him. And the one thing I had never told anyone in that forecourt, the one thing Castlane, with all his medals, did not know, was where my friend had learned to think. But that comes later. First the champion had to dig the hole all the way down. "Watch this," he said, and he stepped right up to the cordon, close enough that I could see the gold pin on his lapel, and he snapped his fingers in front of Calder's face. "Anybody home? No, see, the lights are off. Marvelous discipline. Absolutely no one behind the eyes." He turned to play to the cameras. "This is what the world should understand about these fellows. They look like they're guarding something important. They're guarding the idea that standing still is hard." He grinned. "It isn't. Try thinking sometime. That's hard." The crowd ate it up. A guard cannot answer. That is the cruel and beautiful arithmetic of the post. The more outrageous the insult, the more perfect the stillness must be, and the better the stillness, the more it looks like emptiness to a man determined to see emptiness. Calder gave him a flawless wall, not a flicker, not the smallest tell. And I understood, standing beside him, that the champion had just made the only mistake a man like Calder ever truly punishes. He had mistaken a closed door for an empty room. I should tell you what the day was supposed to be. The Invitational has a tradition older than any of the players, the open board. After the seeded rounds before the final, the champion sits at a single table in the center of the long gallery and takes on all comers from the watching public. Anyone may sit down across from him. Most last 4 moves. It is a spectacle, a victory lap, a chance for the great man to be magnanimous and quick. Castellane loved the open board above all things, because it was the part where ordinary people learned in front of their friends exactly how far below him they stood. He was still snapping his fingers at my friend's face when the master of ceremonies called the players in. He left with a little bow to the cameras and a parting line. "Stay sharp, soldier," he said, or, "Well, stay," and the laughter trailed after him into the gallery like smoke. Calder said nothing. Of course he said nothing, but I have stood beside him long enough to read the half-degree shift of weight that no civilian would ever catch, and I caught it then. The smallest settling, the kind a man makes when a thing he has decided sits down inside him and gets comfortable. I'd seen it before, exactly once, the night a drunk had tried to wrench the gate chain off its post, and Calder had decided between one breath and the next precisely how he was going to end it without ever raising his voice. The relief came at noon. When you come off the ceremonial line, you do not simply walk away. You are marched off, handed over, accounted for. But there is an hour after, a man's own hour, and on invitational day, the house lets the off-watch guardsmen into the back of the long gallery to watch the play, in plain coats, as guests. I changed out of the red. I found Calder by the tall windows at the rear of the hall, in a dark civilian coat that made him look like any other quiet man in the crowd, and I stood beside him while down at the center table, Devin Castellane demolished his fourth volunteer of the afternoon in 11 moves and stood to soak up the applause. "You all right?" I asked him low. "I'm fine, Wills," Calder said. He was watching the board. He had not stopped watching the board since we came in. "He plays beautifully," he added, and there was no bitterness in it at all, which somehow made it worse. "Fast and beautiful and cruel. He's never had to play slow. Nobody's ever made him." "You going to let it go?" I asked. What he said. And my friend, the man with no mind for the game, the furniture with a pulse, the closed door, finally turned his head a quarter-inch and looked at me. And for the first time all day there was something behind the eyes, something I can only call patience with a blade in it. "I'm going to sit down," he said. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because I have told this story 100 times since and people always assume I felt thrilled. I didn't. I felt afraid for him. You have to understand what the open board is. It is a trap dressed as a kindness. The champion is fresh and the volunteers are nervous and the cameras are rolling and the whole hall is rooting for the great man to be gracious and quick. Any soul who sits down there is sitting down to lose in public, in front of a champion who has just spent 20 minutes telling everyone that men like Calder cannot think. If my friend sat down and lost in 11 moves like the rest, Castellane's joke would stop being a joke and start being the truth, witnessed and recorded. And I knew Calder could not bear to be made furniture in front of the whole house, so I caught his sleeve. "Cal," I said, "he's a world champion 3 times, there's no shame in." "Wills," he didn't pull his arm away. He just looked at the table, at the pieces, at the lazy, easy hand the champion laid across the back of his chair. "I taught at the War College for 11 years, he said quietly. "Before this post, I taught the theory of position to officers who'd go on to plan the movement of whole armies. They called what I taught the long board. I have not touched a tournament set in 9 years, but I will tell you what I told every one of those officers on their first day." He looked at me. "Speed is what you use when you can't see far enough to be slow. He is the fastest man in this room because he has never once had to be the patient one. Now let go of my sleeve." I let go of his sleeve. I had known, vaguely, that Calder came to the post from the army, as half of us do. I had not known what he had been. He never spoke of it. He wore no ribbon for it on the ceremonial coat. There is no ribbon for outthinking a room. I had spent 9 years thinking I stood beside a quiet, disciplined infantryman who happened to play a fierce game of an evening. I had been standing beside a man who once spent his days teaching generals how to see the shape of a battle before it was fought, and who had then, by his own choice, traded the lectern for the line, because, as he told me much later, He had grown tired of being asked to plan the moving of men he would never have to look in the eye, and wanted, for once, to simply stand somewhere and keep it safe. I followed him down the length of the gallery. He was unhurried. He has never in his life been hurried. The master of ceremonies was calling the last of the open board. 2 more challengers, friends. The champion's generous time grows short. And a steward in house livery moved to wave my friend toward the line, took one look at the set of his shoulders and stepped back instead. Calder reached the table. He pulled out the volunteer's chair, and he sat down across from Devin Castlane in a plain dark coat, with a guardsman's posture and a guardsman's stillness, and folded his hands. Castlane glanced up, mildly bored, and then something crossed his face. He didn't recognize him. Out of the red, out of the bearskin, my friend was just a still-faced man of middle years with steady hands. But Castlane was a creature of the board, whatever else he was, and a creature of the board reads a sitting posture the way the rest of us read a face. He saw the way Calder settled. He saw the hands. He saw the eyes go to the center of the board and stay there, taking in the whole field at once instead of darting piece to piece the way the nervous ones did. And the boredom went out of his face by 1 degree. "You understand the clock," Castlane said. It was the polite, slightly louder voice the great use on people they expect to be slow. "I understand the clock," Calder said. "And you'd like white or?" "You take white," my friend said. "You'll want the first move." He said it the way you'd offer a man the better chair. The hall, which had been a wall of chatter, dropped half a tone. People can hear a thing in a voice before they can name it. Castlane took white. He pressed his clock and opened the way he always opened in the exhibitions, fast, flashy, a line that won him a quick edge against amateurs and tempted them into trading down into a lost game before they understood they were losing. Calder answered without touching his own clock for a long, long moment. He sat with his hands folded and he looked at the board, and the champion's clock ran, and the gallery began, very slowly, to lean in. Then Calder moved. One quiet piece, one square, the most boring move on the board. A nothing move. Castlane almost smiled. It was the move of a careful, frightened amateur trying not to lose too fast. He fired back instantly. Calder folded his hands again and looked at the board and again let a long silence stretch and again played a small, dull, unglamorous square. He was not trying to win the opening. I understood it slowly, the way the whole room understood it slowly. He was refusing to play fast. He was taking the one thing Castlane had never had to live without: speed, momentum, the rhythm of an opponent who hurries, and he was quietly, politely, taking it off the table. "He's stalling," a voice near me muttered. "He doesn't know what to do, so he's burning his clock." I almost laughed. I had heard Calder say it a dozen times to me across our own board in the guardroom after a watch. "Wills, you keep playing the next move. Learn to play the 12th one." He was not burning his clock. He was using almost none of it. The long silences were the champion's clock, not his. Castlane, rattled by the slowness, by the lack of any error to punish, had started taking longer himself, hunting for the trap he could feel but couldn't find. By the 12th move the board had gone quiet and strange. There were no captures. Nothing dramatic had happened. To the cameras it must have looked like nothing at all: 2 men and a board and a great deal of not very much. But I had played enough losing games against my friend to know the feeling of that particular nothing. It is the feeling of a door closing somewhere behind you that you didn't know was a door. Castlane's pieces were still all on the board, every one of them, beautiful and active and free. And they were, I realized with a small cold thrill, already losing. Not from a blunder, from a slow, patient narrowing, a tightening of the whole field that had begun on Calder's first dull move and had never once stopped, square by square, breath by breath, while the champion played brilliantly into a shape he could not yet see the edges of. Castlane saw it on the 13th move. I watched it happen. He reached for a piece, the obvious strong piece, the move that any commentator would have praised, and his hand stopped above the board. He sat back. He looked, for the first time that day, like a man actually looking. His eyes went to a corner of the board far from the action, to a single quiet soldier of Calder's that had been sitting there since the fourth move doing apparently nothing. And I saw the champion understand that the nothing piece was the whole game, that it had been the whole game from the start, and that he had spent 13 moves admiring his own brilliant army while a man with no mind for the game had been calmly, invisibly, surrounding it. He looked up at Calder's still face, and the recognition when it came was not of a man, it was of a kind of man. "Where," Castelain said, very quietly now, all the show gone out of him, "did you learn to play like this?" Calder didn't answer. He reached out one steady hand and moved the quiet soldier in the corner, the nothing piece, one single square. And the whole shape of the board snapped shut, the way a fist closes, and there was nowhere left for the champion's beautiful army to go. I have replayed that game in my head more times than I can count. People ask me to describe the brilliant move, the dazzling sacrifice, the moment of fireworks. There wasn't one. That was the genius of it, and the thing the crowd could not, at first, even see. There was no fireworks because Calder had decided, somewhere around the fifth move, that he would win without ever giving the room a single bright flash to gasp at, that he would beat the most celebrated showman in the game in the most undramatic way it is possible to win, with 12 dull squares and one quiet soldier in a corner, so that no one watching could ever say it was luck, or a swindle, or a trick. He won the way a tide comes in. By the time you notice, your feet are already wet. A Grandmaster 2 seats down. A silver-haired woman the master of ceremonies had introduced earlier as the eldest living champion of the European board, brought as the tournament's guest of honor, had risen from her chair somewhere around the 11th move and walked over to stand behind Castelain. I had seen her watch 100 games that afternoon without leaving her seat. She did not sit again. She stood with one hand over her mouth, looking down at the board, and when Calder moved the corner soldier she made a small sound, the sound a person makes when they recognize an old friend's handwriting in an unexpected place. "That's the long board," she said, her voice carried in the hush. "I haven't seen anyone play the long board in 20 years. She looked at Calder's still face, and her eyes were bright and sharp. "There was a man at the War College who used to teach it. They said he could see a position dead 12 moves before it died. We used to call him." "It doesn't matter what they called him," Calder said, not unkindly. He said it the way you close a door on a cold draft. He did not want the name. He had not sat down to be a name. He had sat down for one reason, and the reason was not in the corner of the board. The reason was standing 3 feet away that morning, snapping his fingers in a still man's face. Castelain stared at the board a moment longer. Then he did a thing I did not expect, a thing that began, in spite of everything he had said in that forecourt, to make me think there might be a real player under the showman after all. He reached out and laid his king down on its side with his own hand. He resigned. He did not wait to be mated, did not drag it out, did not look for some cheap complication to muddy the loss. He laid down his king cleanly, the way a man surrenders a sword, and he sat back. The gallery did not erupt. That is the part people never believe. There was no roar. There was a silence so complete I could hear the great clock at the end of the hall, and into that silence the silver-haired Grandmaster began, slowly, to applaud. And then the room came in behind her, not the wild applause of a spectacle but the deeper, stranger sound of a great many people clapping for something they had just realized they had badly misjudged. Some of them, I think, had been in the forecourt that morning. Some of them had laughed. Castelain sat through it. To his credit, he sat through every second of it without leaving, his face open and stunned. When the applause finally guttered out, he leaned forward across the board. "You let me have white," he said. "You let me open fast. You let me think I was winning for 13 moves." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't just beat me. You beat the version of me I show the cameras, and you did it without one move I could clip and post." He almost laughed, and it had no cruelty in it now, only a kind of dazed respect. "Who are you? And here is the thing I want most for you to understand. the thing that made me proudest of my friend in all the 9 years I have stood beside him. Calder could have ended him there. He could have leaned across that board and said, in front of the cameras and the Grandmaster and the entire watching house, "I am the man you called furniture this morning. I am the soldier with no mind for the game." He could have collected the whole debt at once, in public with interest. The room would have loved it. I would have loved it, in the small, ungenerous corner of myself that had been waiting all day for exactly that. He didn't. "I'm a guardsman," Calder said. "I stand a post at this house. You walked past me this morning." He stood up from the table, unhurried, and squared the chair behind him. "You said I hadn't got the mind for the game." A pause, the smallest pause, the kind that fills a hall. "You weren't entirely wrong. I haven't got a mind for the game. I have a mind for the position. The game is what you play. The position is what's true whether anyone's playing or not." He inclined his head, the exact courteous half-inch of a guard acknowledging a person of rank. "Thank you for white." Then he turned and walked back up the gallery toward the tall windows, in his plain dark coat, the way a man walks back to a post. And I understood that as far as Sergeant Calder was concerned, the matter was already finished, fully and forever, and he had spent on it not 1 ounce more of himself than it was worth. It was Castelain who would not let it stay finished. He came after my friend, half rose, then properly rose and crossed the gallery through the parting crowd. I tensed. I had spent the morning watching this man be cruel for an audience, and I did not trust the turn. But when he reached Calder, he did the second thing that day I did not expect. "Wait," Castelain's voice had lost every trace of its forecourt swagger. "This morning, in the courtyard." I said. He stopped. He had the grace to look as though the words cost him. "I said you couldn't see 2 moves ahead. I snapped my fingers in your face." He swallowed. "I do that. I find the person who can't answer back and I perform on them. It's a habit. It's an ugly one. And I picked the one man in the building who could have folded me up in front of the world and chose not to." He held out his hand. "I'm sorry for all of it, not for the cameras, for the right reason." The cameras were, of course, still rolling. The whole hall was watching. A lesser man, a man who wanted the moment, would have left that hand hanging just long enough to be filmed. Calder took it at once, a firm, clean grip, the way you take any honest man's hand. "It's already forgotten," my friend said. And the remarkable thing was that he meant it. I have never once heard him mention it since. But the house had not forgotten, and the house was not finished with the day. You must understand that nothing happens in our household by accident, least of all on invitational day. While I had been watching the board, the matter of the morning had been quietly traveling the way such things travel here, from a watching steward to the master of the watch, from the master of the watch to the office of the Lord Steward of the house, who keeps the honor of every man and woman who wears the livery as carefully as he keeps the silver. The forecourt is watched. It is always watched. And a great many people had heard a celebrated guest stand in our courtyard and tell the world that one of the king's own guardsmen was empty behind the eyes. So while Calder stood by the tall windows pretending to watch the next exhibition game, a footman in house livery crossed the gallery and stopped before him and said, very low, that the Lord Steward of the house requested the favor of a word. I went with him. He didn't ask me to, and he didn't tell me not to, which is Calder for yes. The Lord Steward received us in the small paneled room off the gallery, where the house keeps its quiet conversations. He was an old man, narrow and upright, with the kind of stillness our whole regiment learns to envy. He had been still for 60 years longer than any of us, and he did not waste a single motion of it. He did not ask Calder to sit. He looked at him a long moment. "Sergeant," he said, "I am told that this morning in my forecourt a guest of this house stood before you and called you a fool, repeatedly, for an audience, and that you stood your post and gave him nothing." "Yes, my lord," Calder said. "And I am told," the old man went on, "that an hour ago in my gallery you sat down across from that same guest and beat him so cleanly that the eldest Grandmaster in Europe rose from her chair." A faint, dry light came into his eyes. Without, I gather, one move worth posting. There wasn't much to watch, my lord, Calder said. I'm sorry about that. And the Lord Steward of the house laughed, a short, surprised bark of a laugh that I do not think that room had heard in a decade. Then he was grave again, and what he said next I have carried with me ever since. You understand that I cannot have it said, the old man said slowly, that a man may stand in my forecourt and abuse the king's guard for sport, and that the house does nothing. That is not for your sake, Sergeant. You have plainly settled your own account, and more elegantly than I could have. It is for the next man on that line, the one who is not a former master of the War College. The one who truly does have nothing behind the discipline but the discipline itself, which is to say, everything. He cannot beat his tormentor at a board. He has only us. He folded his hands. When a guest insults the uniform must be seen to answer, or the next man stands his post a little more alone. Do you take my meaning? I do, my lord, Calder said, and I saw for the first time that this, not the game, not the apology, was the part he actually cared about, not his own honor, the lines, the next man's. What the house did was quiet and absolute, and I will tell it plainly. There was no scandal, no scene, no banishment marched through the cameras. Devon Castlane was simply, courteously, informed that evening by the master of ceremonies, with the Lord Steward's name behind it, that while the house would always honor the result of the invitational and his place in it, certain of the privileges extended to him as an honored guest were withdrawn. The private rooms, the courtyard access before the public hours, the small intimacies of welcome that the house extends to those it trusts to behave like guests. He would play the final, and he would be applauded for it, because the house keeps its word. But he would never again walk our forecourt as a man free to do as he pleased in it. The honor of the place had been spent, and you do not get that back with an apology, however sincere. You get it back the way you earn anything here, slowly over years by conduct. I expected him to be furious. I want to record that he was not. When the master of ceremonies told him, I had it from the footman, who had it from the steward at the door. Castlane was quiet for a moment and then said only, "That's fair. That's more than fair." And the next morning before the final, he did a thing the cameras did catch and the whole world saw. He walked out into the forecourt at the public hour, found the guardsman standing the morning watch, not Calder. A young man named Friel in his first year, who had not been there at all the day before and had no idea why the famous champion was walking toward him. And Devon Castlane stopped at the cordon a respectful distance back, came to a kind of clumsy attention, and inclined his head to the boy. Then he turned and went in to play his final. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The man who had spent his career performing on the people who couldn't answer back had finally found the one performance worth giving. A quiet bow to a uniform, with no one's name attached, for the right reason. Friel told me afterward he had no idea what any of it was about and had nearly broken his stance from sheer confusion. I told him to keep it to himself, and he has, more or less. Castlane won the final, by the way. Crushed the challenger in a brilliant, slashing, gorgeous game full of exactly the fireworks the cameras love. He is still, by every measure that the world keeps, the greatest player of the board alive. I want that on the record too, because the easy version of this story makes him a fool, and he was not a fool. He was a brilliant man with one blind spot, and the blind spot was this. He had spent his whole life learning to see further across a board than any living person, and had never once thought to wonder what might be going on behind the eyes of a man who had trained himself to show nothing. He thought stillness was emptiness. It is the single most common mistake people make about my friend, and about every man on that line, and it is the one that costs them. Because here is what Calder told me that night in the guardroom, when I finally got the whole story out of him over a board of our own, and lost, naturally, in 22 moves. "Wills," he said, setting up the pieces again with those steady hands, "do you know why I really sat down?" "To put him in his place," I said. I'd have done it in the forecourt. No, Calder shook his head. I sat down because of what he said about the next man, about the man with nothing behind the discipline. He looked at me across the board. He was wrong, and I wanted to show him he was wrong, but not the way you think. He believes the discipline is the cheap part, the standing still, the not answering. He thinks the thinking is the rare and valuable thing, and the stillness is what you do when you've got no thinking to do. He moved his first piece, a small, dull square, the same nothing move from the morning. It's exactly backwards. Anyone can be taught to see 12 moves. It's a skill. I taught it for 11 years to men no cleverer than you. A faint smile. What can't be taught, what I have never once been able to teach a single officer in a single year, is to see 12 moves ahead and then choose to stand perfectly still and do nothing and wait, because the position isn't ready and your moving would only spend what you can't get back. He pressed his clock. That's not the absence of a mind, Wills. That's the whole of it. The stillness isn't what's left when the thinking stops. The stillness is the hardest thing the thinking ever learns to do. I have thought about that more or less every day I have stood the line since. The video, of course, traveled the world. You have probably seen a piece of it without knowing what you were looking at, the clip of the morning, the champion snapping his fingers at a motionless guardsman, and then, cut against it, the same still-faced man in a plain dark coat laying down the greatest player alive with a corner soldier nobody noticed. The two halves of the day, side by side. Someone put a caption on it. Someone always does. The caption that stuck, the one that ran under the clip in 100 languages, was the line the silver-haired Grandmaster had said into the hush of the gallery, half to herself, before Calder closed his hand on the board. They had a man at the War College who could see a position dead 12 moves before it died. The world made it shorter. The world made it, the no-mind man who saw 12 moves ahead. Calder hated the phrase, not because it was unkind, it was the kindest thing anyone said about him all year, but because it got the order of things wrong. They've made it sound, he grumbled to me once, like the seeing is the marvel and the stillness is the gimmick. It's the other way round. But there is no fixing what the world decides to remember, and I have made my peace with the world remembering my friend as the no-mind man. It is at least closer to the truth than what Devin Castlane believed when he walked into our forecourt that morning, and it has had, I think, one quiet good effect. People who have seen the clip look at the men on the line a little differently now. They wonder sometimes what is going on behind the eyes. They are right to wonder. They will almost never find out. Because that is the thing about this post, the thing it took me 9 years and one famous afternoon to truly understand. The whole strength of it is that you cannot see in. The uniform is a closed door, on purpose, and the cruelty and the genius of it is that an arrogant man will always read a closed door as an empty room, and a decent one will always wonder. The discipline does not hide a weakness. It hides whatever the man behind it happens to be, and what he happens to be is no one's business at all unless duty or honor calls it out. Most of the men I stand beside are exactly what they appear to be, steady, ordinary, unremarkable men who have learned to carry a remarkable weight. And some of them, you never know which, are something else entirely, folded up small and quiet behind the same flat forward stare, waiting for no recognition, asking for none. Calder stands the line still. He turned down, gently and finally, the 3 separate offers that came to him in the weeks after the exhibition tour, the commentary booth, the standing invitation to play the great names of the board for money in front of cameras. A man came all the way to the gatehouse to argue with him about it. A smooth man with a contract and a figure on it that would have changed my friend's life. Calder heard him out with perfect courtesy and then said, "Thank you, but I have a post." And that was the end of the conversation. The smooth man could not understand it. How could he? He had spent the whole drive thinking about the thinking, about the rare and valuable mind, about what a mind like that was worth on a stage. He never once considered that the man might have looked 12 moves ahead at the whole shining offer and seen, clearly and early, a position he did not want to reach, and chosen, the way he chooses everything, to stand still instead. I asked Calder, near the end of that long autumn, whether he ever missed it, the board, the war college, the days when his whole job was to see further than anyone in the room and to be praised for it. He was at his post when I asked. I'd timed my own relief to fall beside his, the way I often do, and he could not turn his head to answer me, and he did not. He stood in the cold gold light of the late afternoon, with the rifle's weight crossed in his white gloves, and his eyes level on the middle distance, perfectly, beautifully still, a man the whole world now knew could see 12 moves into any future you cared to set before him, choosing with his entire trained and formidable mind to do, in that moment, absolutely nothing at all. But I know how to read him after all these years. And when the change came and we marched off the line together and our boots hit the cobbles in time, he said it, quiet just to me, the only answer he ever gave. No, Calder said. Out there I spent my whole life moving men I never had to look at. He glanced just once back at the post we'd left, where young Friel had taken up the watch and stood the line behind us, straight and motionless and closed as a door. Here I get to stand somewhere, my friend said, and keep it safe. There's no further to see than that. I have never beaten him at the board. I never will. But that afternoon I stopped trying to, because I finally understood what he had been showing me across that table all along, that the rarest thing in the world is not the mind that sees the most. It is the mind that sees the most and knows the most, and could win any argument and humble any fool and claim any prize laid before it, and chooses instead to be still and to guard and to ask for nothing. They called him the no-mind man. They had it exactly backwards. He was the most disciplined mind I have ever stood beside. The proof was that you could stand beside him for 9 years and never know it until the one day it mattered, and then for a single quiet hour he let you see. And then he closed the door again and went back to his post and kept it safe.